The morning sun burned gold across the vast expanse of Camp Pendleton. Sand and dust swirled in the dry wind, catching in the taut lines of the training ground. Soldiers were already moving, sprints, calisthenics, drills, a rhythm honed from years of repetition. The smell of sweat, leather, and diesel hung in the air, familiar and sharp, signaling the start of another grueling day. Amid the chaos, a lone figure appeared at the gate. A young woman, carrying a weathered duffel over one shoulder, stepped from the transport van onto the cracked asphalt. She was dressed in standard PTs, clean, pressed, as if she just walked off a runway instead of into the middle of Marine boot camp. Her hair was tied back in a tight braid, eyes dark and calm, scanning the base like a predator taking in every detail before it moved. A group of Marines near the entrance noticed her immediately. Laughter bubbled up among them, low and sarcastic. "Check out the newbie," one said, elbowing his buddy. "Look at her PTs. They're cleaner than mine after a week of mud runs. Probably thinks she's gonna sit at a desk and do paperwork all day." "She's too normal," another muttered, shaking his head. "No scars, no grime. Hell, she didn't even grunt when she hopped off the van." They watched her walk, slow and measured, taking deliberate steps that carried her across the training yard. Most soldiers were accustomed to swagger, to ego-driven postures. Hers was entirely different. There was no arrogance in her stride, just control, a calm certainty that seemed almost alien in a place designed to breed toughness and test limits. She passed through the PT field, ignoring the whispers and stares. Soldiers nudged each other, pointing discreetly. "Who is she? Never seen her before." Some of the more daring trainees decided to speak. "Hey," one called, voice loud enough to cut through the morning drills. "You lost or just pretending to look busy?" She didn't respond. Not a blink, not a smile, not even a hint that she'd heard. Her eyes swept past him, scanning the ground, the perimeter, and the other soldiers with the precision of someone who had learned early to measure every threat before it struck. Her silence unsettled them more than anything else. They were used to chatter, to attitude, to posturing. This calm, unbroken attention made some of the Marines glance away, suddenly aware of how unprepared they might be if she was anything more than she appeared. The instructors arrived soon after, nodding the murmurs. A tall, grizzled sergeant approached her, hand resting casually on the edge of his utility belt. "You're in the wrong place, recruit," he said, tone almost teasing, scanning her as if sizing up a puzzle he didn't intend to solve. "This isn't a civilian summer camp. You sure you belong here?" Her eyes flicked up, meeting his with unwavering steadiness. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied, voice low, even, with an authority that made the sergeant pause for just a heartbeat. He tilted his head, trying to mask his surprise. "We'll see about that," he muttered. By now the other trainees were whispering, some mocking, some curious. "She doesn't even flinch," one said. "It's weird." A few of the more observant Marines noticed something subtle. The way she held her shoulders, the alignment of her spine, the careful but fluid way she navigated around scattered equipment. Every step, every gesture had intent. Not arrogance, not fear, just preparation. They hadn't seen that kind of awareness in someone who appeared so ordinary. As the day progressed, she was assigned a bunk in the trainees' barracks. The room was filled with chatter, laughter, and low-level chaos, but she moved through it silently, organizing her gear with methodical precision. Nothing was out of place. No noise, no fuss, just quiet efficiency. One of the trainees, a tall guy with a patch over one eye, watched her carefully. "You're quiet for a reason," he said finally, leaning against the doorway. "What's your story?" She glanced at him briefly. "Story isn't important. What matters is what happens here now." Her words were simple, almost casual, but they carried weight. The boy blinked, caught off guard, unsure how to respond. By late morning, she had observed every corner of the training yard. The position of instructors, the flow of drills, the weak points in formations. even the slightest changes in wind direction that could affect line of sight in a live fire scenario. She didn't write any of it down. She didn't need to. Every observation was committed to memory with an almost mechanical precision. A group of trainees decided to test her. During a brief pause in exercises, one of them tossed a small hand grenade trainer, not live but heavy and clumsy, in her direction, expecting a clumsy reaction. She caught it midair, turned it over in her hands, and handed it back to him without a word. Not a smile, not a laugh, not a fumble. The room went silent. She's not even joking," one muttered under his breath. "Did you see that?" A senior Marine, observing from a distance, narrowed his eyes. Something about her movement, smooth, precise, almost effortless, was familiar. It reminded him of elite operators he had served with years ago. But that couldn't be right. She looked like a trainee, like someone who belonged in the back of the room, not in the middle of high-stakes drills. By midday, whispers had spread across the base. Who is she? Where did she come from? She continued to move through the training yard as if invisible, quietly nodding, analyzing, preparing. Even the instructors who had dismissed her were beginning to feel a creeping unease. There was something about her presence, a calm intensity that made people stop and reconsider everything they thought they knew. As the sun climbed higher, a gust of wind blew dust across the ground, and for a moment she paused, eyes narrowing. She didn't step back. She didn't flinch. She simply watched, waiting, calculating. For everyone else, it was just the wind. But for those paying attention, it was a signal. She had been trained for far more than running drills. By the time the midday bell rang, signaling a brief break, every soldier and trainee had noticed one undeniable fact. This woman, this quiet, unassuming figure, was not to be underestimated. Yet no one knew why. And so the base went on with its routines, unaware that this day, the day a supposedly quiet trainee arrived, would mark the beginning of a story that none of them would ever forget. A story that would start with whispers, turn into awe, and eventually into respect, and perhaps even fear. Because she had a name, a call sign, that only a few on the base would ever dare speak aloud. Iron Wolf. By mid-afternoon, the base hummed with the rhythm of routine. Squads ran drills, instructors barked orders, and the clang of metal from weapons maintenance rang out across the training yard. The young woman, quiet, composed, and utterly unnoticed, was led to the briefing room, a place reserved for trainees during tactical discussions. Her arrival drew eyes immediately. Some soldiers stared openly, some whispered. A few smirked, ready to entertain themselves at her expense. "Great," muttered one Marine, tossing his backpack onto the floor with exaggerated carelessness. "We're stuck babysitting what? A new recruit, or worse, a secretary in PTs." She didn't flinch. She didn't even glance at him. She simply sat down, folding her hands neatly on the table, posture perfect, gaze forward. It was infuriating to them, not arrogance, not meekness, but this calm, unwavering focus. The mocking began in earnest. A young corporal leaned across the table, smirk spreading across his face. "Hey, newbie," he said, voice loud enough for several others to hear. "What are you doing here? Did you get lost on your way to the admin office? Or is this your first step toward becoming the official coffee runner?" A few trainees snickered. Others shook their heads, unsure whether to join in or quietly admire her composure. She didn't answer. She simply tilted her head slightly, eyes scanning the room, taking in every detail. The corporal's stance, the slight hesitation in his voice, the position of each trainee at the table. Every gesture told a story. Every moment she absorbed it. "Come on, you're supposed to say something," the corporal pressed, leaning closer, smirking. "Or are you one of those silent types who only cries when it hurts?" The room erupted into laughter. A couple of trainees tried to nudge her into responding, but she remained silent. She didn't just ignore them. She didn't even give them the satisfaction of a reaction. That silence, more than any verbal comeback, was unnerving. One of the more audacious trainees tossed a pen at her. It bounced off the table. She caught it midair, turned it between her fingers like she'd done it 100 times before, and handed it back without a word. The laughter faltered, whispers rippled through the room. Did she just? A senior instructor, observing from the doorway, frowned. Quiet one, huh? He muttered to himself, crossing his arms. He didn't say anything aloud, but he felt the same uneasy stir that some of the other instructors had felt when she first arrived. There was something off about her, something too precise, too controlled, too experienced. The mocking continued, but it changed subtly. It wasn't playful anymore. There was an edge of frustration creeping in. Every time someone tried to provoke her, she responded with nothing. No anger, no surprise, no embarrassment, just silence and observation. During the afternoon drills, she moved with a quiet efficiency that only amplified their confusion. While trainees stumbled over equipment or shouted instructions to one another, she executed every task flawlessly, folding parachute cords with exact precision, handling weapons with careful familiarity, scanning the area with eyes that missed nothing. One trainee, a lanky kid with a crooked grin, leaned over to his buddy and whispered, "I don't get it. She's good, way better than the rest of us." His buddy shrugged. "Yeah, but she's too quiet. It's weird. Everyone knows the best ones make some noise. She's like a ghost or something." A ghost? That was exactly what she was, a presence that moved silently, leaving others unsettled because they couldn't read her. The base thrummed with nervous energy. Some felt challenged without even understanding why. By the time lunch rolled around, the tension had only grown. Groups of Marines clustered together, debating whether she was dangerous, competent, or just pretending. One particularly bold trainee decided to escalate the mockery. "Hey," he called across the mess hall, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you're sitting with us now. Name's Private Miller. What's yours, quiet girl, or should we just call you Mouse?" The nickname elicited a few chuckles, but she didn't flinch. She lifted her gaze slowly, scanning the room, locking eyes with him for a brief moment. In that instant, the air seemed to tighten. Something about her stare was different, calculated. A warning, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. "Mouse," she said, her voice calm, even. "Interesting choice." Her tone didn't mock, it didn't apologize, it didn't react at all. And yet the effect was electric. Laughter died in the mess hall. Whispers replaced it. The room suddenly felt smaller, heavier, as if she had shifted the balance of authority without moving an inch. Even Miller, bold and brash, felt a twinge of doubt. He tried to smile, tried to regain control of the moment, but her calmness was disarming. He didn't understand it, and that unsettled him more than any insult could have. After lunch, the instructors called everyone back to the yard for tactical exercises. The young woman followed silently, keeping her distance but never falling behind. When formations were called, she fell into line with perfect precision. Every movement was deliberate, exact, and silent. The trainees continued their attempts at subtle mockery. A couple of them tossed casual comments, aimed to break her composure. But she didn't respond. Not with words, not with facial expressions. She simply observed, waited, and adapted. One of the senior Marines finally pulled a few others aside. "Watch her," he said quietly. "There's something about her. She's no ordinary trainee. Pay attention." No one knew what he meant exactly, but his tone carried weight. The word "watch" lingered like a shadow, sending a ripple through the group. By the end of the day, the young woman had done nothing overtly heroic. She hadn't fought, she hadn't yelled, she hadn't even spoken more than a few words. And yet something had changed. The mockery had faded. The laughter had quieted. What had been a casual joke now carried an unspoken tension. Soldiers who had laughed at her arrival now watched her move. In her silence, they sensed discipline, experience, and an unspoken command that seemed to ripple outwards. Every glance, every step, every quiet assessment made it clear. She was more than she appeared. Even as they retired to the barracks that evening, whispers continued. Who is she? Where did she come from? What's her story? No one had answers. Only one thing was certain. The woman they had mocked was no ordinary trainee, and they were beginning to realize that underestimating her could be the first mistake they'd ever make at Camp Pendleton. And somewhere deep inside the young woman, a faint smile tugged at her lips. She had observed, she had learned, and she had waited. The real test, the moment that would define how they saw her, was still coming. Her name, though few knew it yet, carried a weight that even the seasoned Marines would soon feel. A call sign whispered in the shadows of classified operations, a name that would make even the bravest hesitate. Iron Wolf. The next morning, the sun rose pale and sharp over the training yard, casting long shadows across the sand. The young woman, quiet, poised, and seemingly unremarkable, stood among the line of trainees. Around her, Marines and soldiers stretched, grunted, and flexed, ready for the grueling physical assessment that would test their endurance, speed, and raw stamina. Today's the obstacle course, the instructor barked, voice cutting across the field like a whip. You're not just running, you're surviving. Every mistake costs time, every hesitation costs points. The trainees shuffled nervously, some cracked knuckles, some muttered encouragement to themselves, and then there was her. She didn't flinch, she didn't breathe heavier, she simply observed. Eyes scanning every detail, the uneven terrain, the placement of ropes, the position of other trainees, even the small patches of loose sand that could cause a slip. Every step she would take, she already knew how to land it. The whistle blew, and chaos erupted. Soldiers launched into the obstacle course with determination, some sprinting, some misjudging jumps, others struggling with the ropes and walls. The young woman followed, her movements precise and economical, almost effortless. Every leap, every grab, every roll was calculated. She didn't waste energy, she didn't rush. She flowed. The first obstacle, a series of low walls spaced several feet apart, saw trainees stumbling. One Marine tripped over the edge, scraping his knee, cursing under his breath. She stepped over the same wall without breaking stride, fingers brushing the top only once, landing softly on the other side. A small ripple of awe spread through the onlookers, though most tried to mask it. By the halfway point, the course had become a gauntlet. High ropes, cargo nets, balance beams slick with sand, and a 10-foot wall that seemed to challenge everyone's upper body strength. Some of the larger trainees struggled with the rope climb, their muscles straining, faces red. They grunted, shouted, and shook with effort. She climbed as if the rope were an extension of her own body, movement smooth and fluid. Her fingers found grip instantly, her feet positioned perfectly. At the top, she paused just long enough to glance down at the others, not with arrogance but with quiet awareness. No one dared speak to her. The air around her seemed to hum with something unspoken, discipline, precision, experience. The final challenge approached. A long, narrow balance beam suspended just a few feet above the ground, ending with a sprint to the finish line. Soldiers wobbled, some stepping off, cursing as they regained their footing. She moved forward, her body perfectly aligned, eyes focused. One small gust of wind tried to unbalance her, but she adjusted, microsecond reactions guiding her foot placement. And then she ran. From the moment her feet left the beam, she sprinted with effortless speed, closing the distance between herself and the finish line faster than anyone thought possible. Trainees watched, mouths agape, as she crossed the line with a soft but final step, stopping only after clearing the last meter. No ragged breathing, no flailing, no signs of exertion. Just calm, collected dominance. Silence. For a moment, nobody moved. The instructor, tall and grizzled, stared at her as if trying to solve a puzzle. Even the seasoned trainees, those who had once mocked her, found themselves stepping back, a mix of disbelief and awe in their eyes. Who is she?" muttered one, voice barely above a whisper. "She didn't even break a sweat," another said, shaking his head. "No way that's a trainee." Some of the Marines began to murmur amongst themselves, trying to rationalize what they had just witnessed. She looked like a regular recruit on the surface, quiet, unassuming, but her body, her movement, her control betrayed something far greater. The day wasn't over. After the obstacle course came the live-fire tactical simulation. Teams were paired to navigate a course under time pressure, simulating enemy contact, cover, and suppression fire. Her team hesitated at first, unsure how to act. They glanced at her, expecting weakness, expecting error, but she simply moved. Calm, deliberate, precise. "Cover left," she called once, pointing at a low wall for concealment. "Suppressing fire now," she barked, voice calm but authoritative. The team snapped into action, moving as she guided them. Every maneuver she suggested was flawless. Every risk she identified was correct. The simulation, which had been chaotic for other teams, suddenly felt controlled under her presence. One of the senior Marines, observing from a safe distance, shook his head. He had been in countless live-fire drills, had seen hundreds of trainees come and go, and yet this was different. He whispered to a colleague, "She's not a trainee. That's no trainee. Look at the way she moves, directs, calculates. That's someone with real combat experience." But experience alone didn't explain her calm. Most operators in similar simulations shouted, barked, even panicked under pressure. She didn't. She was composed, focused, and entirely in control. By the time the drill ended, her team had outperformed all others. The instructors were forced to take notice, jotting down notes and exchanging glances. Even those who had been openly mocking her hours earlier avoided eye contact, some in awe, some in frustration. They had misjudged her completely. Later, in the quiet of the barracks, whispers continued. Soldiers who had laughed and mocked now sat quietly, replaying her movements in their minds. "She's too precise," one muttered. "Not just skilled, like calculated. Every step, every breath. It's like she knows exactly what will happen before it does." Another nodded. "I've never seen anything like it. She's something else. Something we're not supposed to see at this level." Even the instructors admitted privately that they didn't know where she came from, but they knew one thing: she was exceptional. And not just exceptional for a trainee, exceptional in a way that demanded attention, respect, and caution. The young woman, meanwhile, sat quietly, cleaning her gear, folding it with methodical precision, completely oblivious to the speculation around her. Her eyes occasionally flicked up, scanning the barracks, noting every detail. Weak knots in a belt, an improperly stowed rifle, the nervous twitch of a soldier unsure of his footing. Every observation was logged silently, efficiently. By the end of the day, everyone had realized one undeniable truth. This wasn't a regular trainee. Mockery had turned to whispers, whispers into unease, and unease into something heavier: anticipation, a quiet acknowledgement that she was not just skilled, she was dangerous. Not in the violent sense, but in the sense that she was unpredictable, unstoppable, and entirely out of their league. And somewhere, deep in the back of their minds, the trainees who had once laughed at her began to wonder, how long before they learned her true name? The name that carried weight far beyond the barracks, the training yard, or even the base. A name whispered in classified operations, in shadows, by those who had seen her work in the most dangerous environments imaginable. Iron Wolf. The sun hung low in the sky, burning orange over the training yard as the unit assembled for what was supposed to be a routine tactical exercise. Rifles were checked, radios adjusted, and teams were briefed on a simulated hostile insertion scenario. Trainees buzzed nervously, joking to mask their anticipation. But the quiet woman, the one who had so far defied every expectation, stood apart. Her gaze swept across the yard, noting positions, wind direction, and even the subtle variations in the terrain that could make or break an ambush. Every detail was catalogued with an efficiency that made the observers uneasy. For a group used to noise and bravado, her silence was unnerving. "Move out," barked the drill instructor, and chaos erupted. Teams scurried across the field, weapons raised, shouting instructions over the crackle of radios. Simulated gunfire rang out, echoes bouncing off metal targets and concrete bunkers. Her team froze briefly, uncertain how to proceed. Other teams surged forward, the noise of orders clashing in the air. Confusion threatened to overtake the exercise. And then it happened. A voice cut through the noise, a voice crisp, commanding, and unmistakable. "Iron Wolf, stand ready." Time seemed to stop. The wind paused mid-blow. Trainees froze in place, rifles halfway raised, eyes wide. The sound of that name carried weight beyond any drill, any authority figure, any instructor. Even the senior Marines on the observation deck straightened instinctively. They had heard that call sign before, in reports, debriefs, in hushed tones among operatives who had seen the impossible. Few dared speak it aloud. Few are still expected to hear it in the middle of a base full of trainees. The young woman's head snapped toward the sound. Her body moved as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Posture snapping to attention, feet planted firmly, hands hovering over her weapon, but not nervously. Controlled, ready, lethal, every muscle coiled like a spring. Whispers spread through the ranks. That's Iron Wolf," one muttered. "Impossible," another said, voice trembling. "She can't, she's just a trainee." But she was far more than a trainee. Everyone watching could see it now. The calm precision of her stance, the unspoken authority in her eyes, the confidence that radiated from her like a silent storm. This was no ordinary soldier. This was someone who had earned her reputation in real combat, under fire, in situations that had stripped the weak and left only the exceptional standing. The officer who had called her froze mid-step, suddenly aware of the weight her presence carried. A bead of sweat ran down his temple, not from fear, but from recognition. He had seen reports of Iron Wolf in operations too classified to mention, and now she stood there, silent, calm, ready. Her team, previously confused and hesitant, now instinctively followed her lead. Movements became precise. Commands flowed with clarity. Where there had been chaos, there was suddenly order. Every trainee who had mocked her, every soldier who had whispered doubts, found themselves moving differently, subconsciously aligning with her presence. The instructor who had once barked orders at them all found himself stepping back, letting her dictate the flow of the exercise. There was no arrogance, no ego in her command, only authority earned through experience and skill. And then came the first real challenge, a simulated breach of a hostile position. Trainees were meant to secure the target, neutralize threats, and extract a VIP. Most teams floundered at the first obstacle, radios scrambling, directions conflicting. Her team moved like a single unit. Every step she directed was precise. "Left flank, cover that wall, suppressing fire on my mark." Her words were crisp, calculated, slicing through the tension. They obeyed without hesitation, each movement synchronized with hers, each step measured and deliberate. Even those watching from the sidelines felt it. The way she commanded attention without raising her voice, the way soldiers instinctively deferred to her judgment. It was magnetic, and it was terrifying. By the end of the exercise, her team had completed the scenario flawlessly. No mistakes, no confusion, no hesitation. They had moved as if guided by a singular force, a quiet storm of control and experience. As the dust settled, a hush fell over the yard. The call of Iron Wolf lingered in the air, almost tangible. Trainees whispered to each other, eyes wide. Marines who had doubted her now looked on with a mixture of awe, fear, and respect. One of the instructors finally spoke, voice low and shaky. We need to know, who is she? How does a trainee move like that?" The answer was clear to those who had been watching all along, but no one dared speak it. This woman was Iron Wolf, a soldier forged in battle, tempered by chaos and disciplined beyond comprehension. Her reputation wasn't just a story, it was truth. And now, for the first time, it had made its presence known to everyone on the base. Even the young woman herself, calm and collected as ever, allowed a small, almost imperceptible nod. The moment had arrived. She didn't need to boast, to shout, to prove herself. The call of her name, the respect it commanded, had done that for her. For the first time, some of the trainees, those who had laughed, mocked, and underestimated her, understood the gravity of what they were facing. This was no ordinary day. This was no ordinary soldier. And as they watched her move through the final stages of the exercise, executing every maneuver with near-perfect precision, they realized a sobering truth. Iron Wolf was a force to be reckoned with. By the end of the day, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the yard, every soldier on that base knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. The quiet trainee they had dismissed, mocked, and underestimated had revealed herself. And with the simple call of her name, Iron Wolf, she had commanded respect, instilled awe, and frozen even the most seasoned Marines in recognition of her unparalleled skill. As the base settled into evening drills, soldiers moved differently. Conversations were quieter, eyes sharper, movements more careful. Everyone had witnessed something extraordinary, something that could not be taught, something earned through fire, blood, and experience. And somewhere, deep in her mind, the young woman allowed herself a brief, private smile. They were beginning to understand. They were beginning to see what she had always known. The game had changed, and from this moment on, Iron Wolf would be the standard they measured themselves against. The legend had arrived. The yard was silent, save for the fatting hum of helicopters in the distance and the soft shuffle of boots against the sand. The simulation was over, but its echoes lingered in every corner. The trainees, once brash and careless, now moved cautiously, their eyes constantly flicking toward the young woman who had upended their assumptions. She stood apart, rifle slung low, hands resting lightly, posture still perfect. No words left her lips. No celebration, no flourish, just the quiet authority of someone who had already proven herself. The commanding officer, a man seasoned by decades of operations and deployments, approached slowly. His boots kicked up dust as he walked, and every trainee instinctively straightened, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Soldiers," he said, voice firm but controlled, "you've just witnessed something unusual, something extraordinary." He paused, scanning the group, eyes lingering on the young woman. "Some of you may have assumed she was, well, inexperienced." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter ran through the trainees, quickly stifled by their own shame. The officer's gaze hardened. "You were wrong, completely wrong." He turned his attention to the young woman. "Iron Wolf," he said, and the words carried weight like steel drawn from its sheath. "Step forward. I think it's time everyone understands who they're dealing with." For a moment the yard held its breath. Trainees shuffled uneasily, some craning their necks, others unable to hide curiosity and awe. Even the instructors paused, exchanging uneasy glances. She stepped forward slowly, deliberate and calm, the soft crunch of her boots on the sand echoing louder than any gunfire from earlier. The commanding officer continued, voice steady, recounting the information that had been classified until now. "This soldier," he began, "has served in environments most of us wouldn't dare imagine. Special operations, classified deployments, missions that required precision, intelligence, and nerves of steel beyond belief. Her call sign, Iron Wolf, is not a nickname, it's a reputation. Earned in combat under fire when the stakes were life and death. And today she reminded us all of it." The trainees' mouths fell open. Some looked to each other in disbelief. Some muttered under their breath, "She's what?" "Quiet," the officer continued, "yet lethal. Observant, yet proactive. Calm under pressure, decisive when others falter. Every one of you who underestimated her today should understand the lesson. Skill, discipline, and experience cannot be judged by appearances." She remained still, listening, eyes sharp and clear but calm. She had expected this moment, not the recognition itself, but the subtle shift in perception. The day had been a test, though not just for the trainees. It had been a test for her as well. Could she lead silently? Could she command without shouting? Could she make them see her worth without proving it in theatrics? A few of the more vocal trainees, those who had mocked her earlier, shuffled forward hesitantly. One spoke, voice trembling. We didn't know. We thought," he faltered, unsure how to continue. "We thought you were just a trainee." She held up a hand, not in admonishment but in quiet acknowledgement. She didn't need to humiliate them. The revelation itself, her calm mastery, and the weight of her presence were enough. Another trainee, younger, barely 19, finally asked the question everyone was thinking. How do you do it? How are you so ready for everything?" Her eyes swept over them, not with condescension but with a teaching gaze. "Preparation," she said simply. "Observation, discipline, awareness. You cannot control what's outside, but you can control how you respond. That is what separates failure from survival." The commanding officer nodded, clearly impressed. "And that, soldiers, is why she's Iron Wolf. Not because of reputation alone, but because she has proven herself time and again in situations where hesitation would cost lives." A hush fell over the group. The trainees had watched her move through drills, obstacle courses, and live fire simulations, and yet hearing the truth, the full weight of her experience, was different. Now they understood why her calm demeanor had been intimidating, why her silence had been unsettling, why no one could challenge her authority in the field. One of the senior instructors, usually hard as stone, leaned to a colleague. "I've seen operators in my time," he said quietly. "Hell, I've served with the best, but she's different. That woman is not just trained. She's crafted. Every movement, every choice, it's like she's already 10 steps ahead of us all." The young woman herself didn't respond to the praise or the whispers. She had no need for validation. Her satisfaction came from the subtle acknowledgement of competence in others. Today had been a lesson, not just for the trainees, but for anyone who underestimated skill, discipline, and experience. Some of the trainees who had mocked her earlier now approached cautiously, awkwardly. A few mumbled apologies, others simply nodded, heads bowed in recognition. She accepted none verbally, but her steady gaze and subtle nod acknowledged their shift in respect. By the end of the day, the atmosphere at the base had changed. Where there had been casual banter, ego, and assumptions, there was now quiet respect, a recognition of hierarchy not dictated by rank, but by skill, presence, and earned authority. Iron Wolf had shifted the balance without raising her voice or seeking acknowledgement, simply by being herself. The commanding officer concluded the briefing. "Remember today," he said, "what you witnessed is the standard, not by appearance, not by rank, but by action, discipline, and preparation. If you fail to learn that lesson, it could cost you and your team everything." As the soldiers filed out, whispers continued. "Iron Wolf can't believe it. She's a legend. WWE underestimated her completely." The young woman remained at attention, quietly observing, her presence alone commanding more authority than any shout or order. For the first time, a few of the trainees dared to hope that perhaps, under her guidance, they could learn more than brute strength or shouting orders. They could learn precision, patience, and control. And as the sun began to set over the horizon, casting long shadows across the training yard, one undeniable truth lingered in everyone's mind. Iron Wolf was no ordinary soldier. She was a force of nature, tempered by battle, and her presence alone could change the outcome of any operation. That day, the base learned a lesson far more important than drills or simulations. They learned respect, humility, and the quiet power of a soldier who had earned her place through blood, discipline, and unwavering focus. Iron Wolf had arrived, not just as a trainee, not just as a soldier, but as a legend in the making. The morning sun barely touched the horizon when the alarm sounded across Camp Pendleton. It wasn't the usual drill horn or the friendly chaos of routine exercises. It was sharp, sudden, and insistent, cutting through the barracks like a blade. "Simulated hostile breach," the instructor bellowed. "All units respond." Trainees scrambled. Radios buzzed with static. Voices overlapped as panic began to ripple through the groups. The exercise was meant to test coordination, but what started as controlled chaos quickly became confusion. Teams collided in the yard, miscommunication multiplying with every shout. The young woman, Iron Wolf, was already moving. Calm, precise, her boots silent on the sand as she assessed the field. Her team hesitated, uncertain, frozen in that brief moment before instinct. Every other team was struggling, scrambling, shouting over each other. They didn't know where to go or what to do next. Iron Wolf's voice cut through the clamor. "Form up, Team Alpha left flank. Team Bravo suppressing fire on my mark. Eyes on the target now." It wasn't loud. It wasn't demanding. But somehow, everyone obeyed. The weight of her presence, the authority in her tone, and the precision in her gestures commanded attention in a way shouting never could. The trainees moved as a single organism, following her without hesitation. The first obstacle appeared, a simulated building filled with hostile targets, painted silhouettes, and strategically placed sensors. Other teams approached hesitantly, pausing to communicate and argue. Iron Wolf's team advanced methodically, every step calculated, every movement synchronized. She signaled the first member forward to breach the door. "Stack, 1, 2, 3 on my count, move." They entered flawlessly. Iron Wolf covered angles, eyes scanning, every sense alert. A misstep by a trainee could trigger a sensor or ruin timing, but none faltered. She anticipated problems before they happened, correcting silently, subtly, without raising her voice. Outside, chaos continued. Simulated explosions went off. Smoke filled parts of the yard. Trainees outside the building stumbled, confused and disoriented. Iron Wolf's team, however, executed their movements with the precision of seasoned operators. "Suppressing fire, cover right wall," she commanded. The team followed immediately, their rifles trained, positions perfect. A senior Marine observing the exercise from the tower shook his head in disbelief. "I've run drills for 20 years, he muttered, "and I've never seen a team move like that under this pressure. She's not just leading them, she's anticipating everything." The exercise grew more intense. A simulated ambush erupted at the far end of the yard. Trainees panicked, dropping behind cover randomly, disorganized. Iron Wolf assessed the threat in seconds. Without hesitation, she moved toward the chaos, signaling her team to converge. "Flank left, suppress right, cover my 6. Her voice was calm but urgent. Every word was precise, every order weighted. The team responded immediately, converging on the hostiles in a fluid, synchronized motion. The sight was almost hypnotic. Trainees and instructors alike paused, watching in awe as Iron Wolf's team neutralized threats, cleared rooms, and secured the perimeter flawlessly. It was no longer just a drill. It was a demonstration of what leadership under fire could look like. One of the trainees, who had mocked her weeks before, whispered under his breath, "She's imperfect. How is she human?" Iron Wolf didn't speak to him. She didn't need to. Her focus was absolute, her presence magnetic. Every soldier in her vicinity adjusted their movements based on her posture, gestures, and the subtle cues in her gaze. She didn't shout, she didn't panic. She simply commanded, and they followed. The climax of the exercise came when the VIP, a mannequin representing a high-value target, was trapped under simulated fire at the far end of the yard. Teams from across the base hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Iron Wolf's team advanced instantly. "Cover fire, extraction route clear, eyes on threat," she instructed. They moved as one, clearing the area, securing the target, and extracting it to safety, all in record time. The yard was filled with dust, smoke, and the echoes of the simulated gunfire. Yet Iron Wolf's team emerged unscathed, calm, and in complete control. The commanding officer, standing nearby, lowered his binoculars, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. "She just did what no one else could," he murmured. Not just a team, but an entire unit functioning at peak efficiency under extreme pressure. By the end of the exercise, trainees who had mocked, whispered, or doubted her weeks earlier now approached cautiously. Some offered tentative nods of respect, others tried to apologize awkwardly. Iron Wolf's gaze swept over them, steady and unflinching. She didn't seek validation. She didn't need it. The lesson had been delivered through action, not words. Later in the debrief, the commanding officer addressed the base. Soldiers, what you just witnessed is the standard of excellence. Not by rank, not by brute force, but by focus, discipline, and preparation. The soldier you saw today, Iron Wolf, demonstrated what leadership truly is, and for those who doubted her, consider your assumptions challenged. Whispers filled the room. Trainees glanced at each other, minds racing. Some silently vowed to learn from her, to observe her movements, to understand what made her so effective. Others simply sat, awestruck, realizing how completely they had underestimated someone they had called a trainee. Iron Wolf, meanwhile, returned quietly to her gear. She cleaned her rifle with methodical precision, folded her uniform neatly, and surveyed the yard with the same calm, calculated attention she had shown throughout the day. The chaos, the fear, the panic, it had all been a test, and once again she had proven herself without arrogance, without theatrics. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the base, the lesson lingered in every mind. Competence, discipline, and presence are earned, not assumed. And Iron Wolf, silent and unyielding, had just taught it better than anyone could with words. The legend wasn't just in her past, it was alive, visible, undeniable. The quiet trainee had become the standard. The chaos of the simulation had been transformed into order under her hand alone. And deep in the eyes of those who had doubted her moments ago, fear and respect had taken root. They now knew the truth. Iron Wolf was more than a soldier. She was a force, a leader, and a living example of what mastery under pressure truly meant. The day ended not with applause or celebration, but with a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement from every Marine who had witnessed it. She had earned their respect, and she didn't need to ask for it. Iron Wolf had transformed doubt into awe, and the base, for the first time, understood what it meant to follow someone who truly commanded the battlefield. The sun had fully risen over the base, casting long shadows that stretched across the training yard, but the energy among the troops was far from routine. Where once there had been laughter, whispers, and mocking glances toward the quiet young woman, there was now a charged stillness. Every Marine, every trainee, and every instructor seemed to recognize something unspoken. She had earned their attention and, more importantly, their respect. Even the trainees who had once jeered at her arrival approached cautiously now. No jokes, no challenges, only tentative curiosity and acknowledgement of the skills they had witnessed. One of them, Private Jensen, the same soldier who had tried to nickname her Mouse weeks before, approached slowly, keeping his distance. "Iron Wolf," he began, voice low, unsure how to phrase the words. We underestimated you. He stopped, ashamed, unsure if he should continue. She glanced at him, calm, steady, her eyes piercing but not unkind. A subtle nod was all it took, a gesture that said more than any lecture could. Recognition, yes, but also an unspoken message. Respect must be earned, not begged for. It was the first of many such interactions that morning. Trainees and operators alike began to realize that her presence alone was a lesson. She didn't need to bark orders to command authority. She didn't need to flaunt experience to gain respect. Every action she had taken, from flawless obstacle courses to commanding the chaotic live-fire drill, spoke volumes more than any words ever could. The commanding officer gathered the entire unit for a debrief. The tension in the air was palpable. Soldiers who had once doubted her now stood at attention, not just out of protocol, but out of genuine acknowledgement of her capability. "You've all seen what leadership and discipline look like," the officer began, his voice steady but firm. Today, Iron Wolf didn't just demonstrate her own skill. She showed you how a team can function when every member understands their role, trusts one another, and moves with purpose. That is what separates effective operators from mediocre ones. A few heads nodded slowly, silently accepting the weight of the lesson. The instructor paused, letting his gaze settle on the young woman. Not everyone can command like that, he continued. Not everyone has the presence, the calm under pressure, or the foresight to guide a team through chaos. But what you all witnessed is proof that respect isn't given. It's earned through competence, consistency, and courage. She stepped forward quietly. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm, precise, and resonant enough to draw every ear. You've all worked hard. You've trained, you've sweated, you've pushed yourselves. That's commendable. But understand this, skill alone isn't enough. Discipline, observation, and the ability to remain calm under pressure are what save lives. Today's exercise wasn't about proving myself. It was about proving to you that you can do better, be sharper, and trust each other. Her words were simple, almost understated, but they hit hard. Each soldier could feel the truth in them. This wasn't a lecture. This was a living example of what leadership under fire looked like. Some trainees approached her later, not out of obligation but out of genuine desire to learn. They asked questions about technique, strategy, and situational awareness. She responded patiently, demonstrating with small gestures, correcting mistakes gently, guiding without condescension. Every explanation reinforced a lesson. Excellence is cultivated, not assumed. Even the instructors took note. A grizzled senior Marine who had initially doubted her presence approached her quietly. "I've seen a lot in my years," he admitted. "Operators with medals, combat experience. But today you showed something different. You didn't just lead, you taught, and without raising your voice. That's rare." She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the praise but without seeking it. Her focus was elsewhere, on the unit, on their readiness, and on the quiet building of competence and trust. By midday, the atmosphere of the base had shifted entirely. Teams moved with purpose, coordination, and attention to detail. Where chaos once dominated drills, precision now prevailed. Soldiers were watching each other, learning from mistakes, adapting quickly, and trusting the commands of those who demonstrated capability. And everywhere, in every eye, there was recognition of the force who had inspired it all: Iron Wolf. Later, during a routine weapons inspection, she walked slowly down the line. Every Marine stiffened instinctively, not because she demanded it, but because her presence demanded focus. Her gaze lingered just long enough on those unprepared, sending a silent message: be ready or face consequences in the field. But she also offered subtle nods to those who executed correctly, acknowledgement of effort, skill, and discipline. Respect, once again, earned through performance. Private Miller, who had tossed the pen at her weeks before, now worked meticulously on his rifle, glancing occasionally at her for approval. When her eyes flicked toward him, she gave a slight nod. He exhaled quietly, feeling both pride and relief. He finally understood the weight of discipline and the difference between mockery and mastery. By evening, the final lesson of the day became clear. Leadership is not about titles. Authority is not about rank. Respect is not something demanded. It is something observed, tested, and earned. Iron Wolf had demonstrated it in every step, every command, and every calm, measured movement. Soldiers who had once been brash and loud now approached her quietly, asking questions, observing her methods, and internalizing her example. Instructors whispered among themselves, noting how her presence had transformed the morale and discipline of the base in just a few short days. And in that quiet acknowledgement, Iron Wolf remained the same: composed, disciplined, unshakable. She didn't revel in her influence. She didn't seek recognition. She simply continued, step by step, action by action, teaching a lesson far more profound than any textbook or drill could convey. That night, as the base lights flickered on and soldiers retreated to their bunks, the memory of the day lingered in every mind. The young woman who had arrived quietly, dismissed as a trainee, had earned a legacy in a matter of hours. A legacy defined not by noise, not by titles, not by rank, but by unwavering skill, calm authority, and the ability to turn chaos into order. In every corner of the base, whispers echoed, "She's Iron Wolf. She's different. She's a standard we now have to live up to." And deep in the stillness of the night, as she cleaned her gear, folded her uniform and prepared for another day, the lesson remained clear. Respect must be earned, and Iron Wolf had just shown the Marines exactly how it was done. The transformation was complete. Mockery had become awe, doubt had become trust, and a silent trainee had become the benchmark by which every soldier on the base would measure themselves from that day forward. Iron Wolf was no longer a mystery. She was the standard. The dawn was crisp and sharp over Camp Pendleton, casting long shadows across the training yard. The base was alive with movement, but a subtle shift lingered in the air. The energy was different now, not casual, not chaotic, but disciplined, watchful. Every soldier, every trainee, every instructor carried a quiet awareness. Iron Wolf had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. She moved through the yard silently, inspecting the formations, checking gear, observing positions. Soldiers stepped into line automatically, rifles at attention, movements precise, not because she demanded it, but because her presence alone commanded focus. The unit had learned through drill, through simulation, and through the weight of her actions that competence was contagious and discipline was magnetic. Her eyes swept across the yard, noting small details. The angle of a rifle sight, the alignment of boots, the posture of a trainee slumping under fatigue. Small corrections were made, subtle gestures, almost invisible to the untrained eye. Every adjustment honed the unit, every observation strengthened their cohesion. A junior instructor, still reeling from the past week, whispered to a colleague, "I've been in the Corps for over 20 years, seen countless trainees. But she's not like anything I've ever seen. She doesn't just lead, she elevates everyone around her." Iron Wolf paused by the obstacle course, watching as a new group of trainees attempted it. Some stumbled, others froze mid-jump. She didn't shout, didn't chastise. Instead, she approached quietly, demonstrating proper technique, adjusting a grip, nudging a stance. One by one, their movements improved, not because of words, but because of observation and example. Nearby, a group of soldiers whispered, "She's like a ghost and a teacher all at once," one said. "You watch her and suddenly you move differently. You think differently. You perform differently." That afternoon, a surprise exercise was announced, a simulated hostage scenario with multiple threats, timed and monitored from the tower. Other units scrambled, arguing over tactics and assignments. Iron Wolf's team moved instantly, silent communication and precise coordination guiding them like clockwork. "Alpha team left flank, Bravo team cover the roof," she directed. "Eyes sharp, anticipate every move, move on my mark." The simulation escalated quickly. Explosions echoed, smoke filled parts of the yard, and trainees struggled with coordination. But Iron Wolf's team advanced as a single entity. Every member followed her lead instinctively, moving fluidly, covering angles, neutralizing threats, and securing objectives. From the observation tower, the commanding officer spoke into the radio, barely able to hide his astonishment. "Report. How is one team moving like this while the rest are floundering?" "Unknown, sir," a junior officer replied. "They're perfectly synchronized. It's like they've been operating together for years." The truth was simpler. They weren't synchronized because of experience together. They were synchronized because Iron Wolf's presence demanded it. She had taught them to anticipate, to observe, to trust, and to act with precision. By the end of the exercise, Iron Wolf's team had completed the scenario flawlessly. Not a single target was missed, not a single teammate left vulnerable. They emerged calm, composed, and entirely in control, while the other units scrambled to regroup. Soldiers who had once doubted her now approached cautiously, asking questions, seeking guidance, and learning from her every subtle movement. Mockery and hesitation had been replaced by respect and quiet reverence. Even the instructors, veterans of countless operations, whispered among themselves in disbelief. "Her name Iron Wolf," one muttered. "We all know it now, but seeing her in action, she's more than a legend." Iron Wolf herself remained silent. She didn't revel in recognition, didn't seek applause. Her satisfaction came from observing improvement, from noting the small adjustments in her team, from seeing the trainees grow under her example. Later, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the base, the commanding officer gathered the unit. He addressed them formally, but his voice carried more awe than authority. "Today, you've witnessed what leadership, discipline, and experience truly mean. Iron Wolf has demonstrated that skill is not defined by rank, title, or appearance. It is defined by preparation, observation, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Respect is earned, not given, and she has earned it not just from her actions, but from how she has elevated all of you." The soldiers nodded silently, absorbing the weight of the lesson. No one laughed, no one jeered, no one doubted. Iron Wolf stood slightly apart, observing the reaction without fanfare. She had proven her point, taught her lesson, and reinforced her reputation. Yet she remained approachable, precise, disciplined, an embodiment of the standards she expected from everyone around her. As night fell, the base quieted. Soldiers returned to barracks, but the story of the day, of the quiet trainee who had become a legend, circulated quickly. Whispers of Iron Wolf carried through the hallways, a name now spoken with reverence and awe. In the privacy of her bunk, she cleaned her gear meticulously, folding every item with exact precision. Her uniform, rifle, and kit were flawless, not out of vanity but because mastery demanded it. Every detail mattered. Every action had purpose. A knock on the door startled her slightly. It was Private Jensen, who had once mocked her, now approaching with humility and quiet respect. "I thank you," he said simply, "for teaching us, for showing us what real skill and leadership look like. I don't know how to explain it, but thank you." She looked at him calmly, a small, almost imperceptible nod acknowledging the words. No lecture, no praise, just quiet affirmation. He left, understanding without question what she had taught. Iron Wolf lay back on her bunk, eyes scanning the ceiling, replaying the day in her mind. The drills, the simulations, the moments of chaos, everything had been a test, not for her but for those around her. She had elevated their performance, reshaped their perceptions, and instilled respect where doubt had once lingered. In the quiet of the night, the legend of Iron Wolf was no longer a story whispered in secrecy. It was alive, tangible, and undeniable. Camp Pendleton had witnessed the transformation of a unit, the elevation of its soldiers, and the emergence of a leader unlike any they had ever known. And though she remained quiet, disciplined, and almost invisible in her presence, everyone now understood one undeniable truth. Iron Wolf was not just a soldier. She was a force, a teacher, and a standard that would endure long after the drills ended, long after the simulations concluded, and long after the sun set over the training yard. The base had changed, the soldiers had changed, and Iron Wolf, silent, disciplined, and legendary, remained the unwavering heart of it all. For Camp Pendleton, and for the Marines who would carry her lesson into every mission and every field operation, the message was clear. Respect must be earned, discipline must be maintained, and greatness is defined by action, not words. Iron Wolf had arrived, and she would never leave.